On the morning of March 14, 2018, a 62-year-old farmer named Dale Pruitt drove his rusted 2003 Ford pickup across the flat, pale expanse of Meade County, Kansas, and handed a check for $6,000 to a man who practically sighed with relief when he took it. The man was Clint Hargrove. His family had owned the 120 acres for nearly 4 decades, since 1979, and in that time they had extracted almost nothing from the ground and spent far more than they ever recovered. The soil was dense alkaline clay, laced with a calcium carbonate hardpan called caliche. It locked out moisture. It choked root systems before they found purchase. Winter wheat had failed there twice, and an $11,000 remediation effort involving deep tillage and lime applications had accomplished even less. By 2016, Clint had stopped trying. The field sat idle, collecting thistle and quiet disappointment. So when Dale Pruitt offered $50 an acre, Clint signed the deed before the ink had time to feel real. The neighbors said nothing when they heard about the sale, because there was nothing surprising about it. Everyone in that part of Meade County understood that those 120 acres were, by any reasonable agricultural measure, worthless. What none of them knew, what Clint Hargrove didn't know, what Dale Pruitt himself barely allowed himself to believe, was that beneath that alkaline clay and caliche hardpan, a reserve of groundwater had been accumulating for more than 12,000 years. 3 years after that handshake, hydrologists would place a conservative value on what lay beneath Dale Pruitt's worthless land at just over $10 million. What he noticed, how he found it, and what he chose to do with it. That is the story worth telling. If you're drawn to stories about ordinary people whose patience and quiet attention changed everything, subscribe. Every week we uncover farm stories with lessons that reach far beyond the field. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. These stories travel further than we ever expect. Dale Pruitt had not come to Meade County looking for anything in particular. He'd come looking for something to anchor himself to after years that had taken most of what he'd built. He'd grown up on a dryland wheat operation in Comanche County, 70 miles to the east, inherited it at 38, worked it through a decade of reasonable seasons, then lost the majority of the productive ground during the catastrophic drought of 2012. The bank wasn't cruel about it, the weather was. The divorce came the following year. His eldest son relocated to Denver and kept his distance. Dale moved into a rented farmhouse outside Fowler, took consulting work with a regional grain cooperative, and supplemented his income doing fencing and equipment repair for neighboring operations. He was not a bitter man. Farming had taught him that bitterness is a luxury the land doesn't have time for. What loss gave him was a particular discipline, not passive patience, but the practice of watching closely, of trusting what the land shows over what people say it means. He had lost enough to know where the truth usually lived. He first crossed onto the Hargrove property in January 2018, accompanying a neighbor who needed help surveying a fence line along the eastern boundary. The ground was half frozen, the sky a uniform gray, and Dale had no professional reason to spend more than 10 minutes there. But in the northeastern corner of the field, he stopped. Every surrounding acre was pale and dormant. In that corner, covering perhaps 3 acres, the soil held a deeper, faintly brownish color that didn't belong. The native switchgrass stood taller there, noticeably denser than any other section of the field. And along the fence line at the very edge of that section, 4 cottonwood saplings had taken root in ground that appeared to offer no reason to exist. Cottonwoods don't speculate, they follow water. Dale walked back to his truck, noted the location, and spent the next 6 weeks thinking before he called Clint Hargrove. After the purchase, he did not rush. For the first 3 months, he walked the property weekly, photographing everything and recording observations in a composition notebook he kept in the truck. He mapped where snowmelt pooled and where it disappeared faster than the soil's structure should have allowed. He paid particular attention to the northeastern corner, the way moisture seemed to be drawn downward rather than settling at the surface. In May, he pulled soil cores at 16 locations across the property using a hand auger, sending each sample to the K-State Soil Testing Laboratory in Manhattan. The results confirmed everything the Hargroves already knew: high alkalinity, dense clay, elevated sodium, negligible organic matter. By conventional analysis, the land was a dead end. But when Dale augured into the northeastern corner and reached 14 feet, the caliche gave way, not gradually, but cleanly, to a layer of fine-grained sand. Saturated sand. He stared at it for a long time. He contacted the Kansas State University Extension Office and described what he'd found: the vegetation pattern, the drainage behavior, the abrupt soil change at 14 feet. He asked whether isolated aquifer pockets existed in that part of Meade County. The extension soil scientist who came out was named Renata Okafor. She had spent 22 years working the high plains and arrived with carefully managed expectations. She left 4 hours later with her notebook full and her skepticism displaced. Renata's topographic maps revealed what ground-level observation missed. The northeastern corner of the property sat at a subtle but measurable depression, just 2 to 3 feet lower than the surrounding field. Over centuries, subsurface water migrating downslope had accumulated at that low point. The thick caliche layer above had acted not as a barrier, but as a seal, preventing upward evaporation and trapping a pressurized body of water in the formation below. A confined aquifer, unlike the shallow water tables most farmers drill for, is sealed between impermeable geological layers above and below. Pressure builds within it over time. When accessed through a properly drilled well, water often rises without pumping, a natural artesian condition that can persist for generations if managed carefully. Renata referred Dale to a licensed hydrologist named Garrett Wills out of Dodge City. Garrett arrived in August with ground-penetrating radar equipment and a crew of 2. Over 3 days, they mapped the full subsurface profile of the 120 acres. What the radar revealed was an isolated pocket aquifer, a compartmentalized remnant of the greater Ogallala Formation, separated from the main system by ancient geological faulting, but continuously recharged by a watershed zone approximately 6 miles to the northwest. Their conservative estimate, 2.5 billion gallons of recoverable water. In a region where Ogallala depletion had cut well yields by more than 60% over 30 years, where municipalities were paying upward of $4 per thousand gallons for secured agricultural water rights, that number was extraordinary. The land had looked dead because it was protecting something alive. The alkaline clay, the caliche, the compacted surface that defeated every cultivation attempt. These were not signs of failure. They were a geological lid, 12,000 years in the making, concealing the one thing the high plains could least afford to lose. Word reached Clint Hargrove by October. He drove to Dale's farmhouse unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon and sat at the kitchen table without speaking for a long moment. He was not angry, not exactly. He was something more complicated. A man confronting the possibility that he had surrendered something before understanding what he held. He never threatened legal action. The deed was clean and he knew it. What followed was predictable. A water rights attorney from Wichita made contact within a week. 2 agricultural investment firms sent representatives. A municipal water district from the neighboring county submitted a formal inquiry regarding long-term lease arrangements. The county requested a full hydrology report. Dale met with all of them. He listened carefully and made no commitments. What Dale Pruitt chose to do next surprised everyone who believed they already knew how this story ended. He spent the winter of 2018 and into 2019 working with Renata Okafor and the Kansas Water Office to fully document the aquifer's recharge zone and its long-term replenishment rate. He placed conservation easements on the upslope watershed acreage to protect the recharge area from development. He registered the aquifer under a managed depletion agreement, a legal framework that limits annual extraction to a fixed percentage of the documented annual recharge, preventing the reserve from being exhausted within a single generation of use. Then he approached 6 neighboring farm operations, including Clint Hargrove's remaining land, with a proposal for a shared irrigation cooperative. Members would contribute equally to infrastructure costs and draw water according to a strictly monitored annual allocation. No member could transfer or sell water rights externally without unanimous consent from the group. The cooperative was formalized in April 2019. Within 2 growing seasons, 4 of the 6 member farms had returned previously unproductive acreage to active cultivation. After 3 years of monitored extraction, the aquifer showed no meaningful decline in pressure or recoverable volume. Dale Pruitt remained in his rented farmhouse. He did not become suddenly or extravagantly wealthy. What he gained was something that resists being entered into a ledger, a stake in the land, and in the future of 6 families who farmed the ground beside it, which may have been, all along, what he was looking for when he stopped at that fence line in January. There is a kind of knowledge that accumulates quietly and expresses itself in small gestures. In the decision to linger at a fence line in January, to notice that the switchgrass is standing slightly taller than it should, to follow a thread of curiosity when every practical voice says to keep walking. Dale Pruitt was not a genius. He was a man whom loss had taught to pay attention, to the land, to the things that don't fit, to the small questions that deserve a longer answer. The aquifer had been there for 12,000 years. It lay beneath $50 an acre of cracked alkaline clay that nobody wanted. The lesson is not about water. It is about what we decide to look at and what we walk past without stopping. Wendell Berry wrote, "It may be that when we no longer know what to do, we have come to our real work, and that when we no longer know which way to go, we have begun our real journey." Dale Pruitt didn't know what he was looking for on that cold January morning in 2018. He only knew that something deserved a second look. That was enough.